Chair of this committee, Chairwoman Maloney of New York, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank John Sopko for your service, and also the chairman for holding this important hearing. I'd like to focus my questions on the importance of women in Afghanistan and the differences it has made with America allowing them to participate in the economy and in education. I recall when we first went to Afghanistan, women were murdered and killed if they went to school. And now I'm told that they have made a tremendous progress. Over the past 18 years, they make up 14% of kindergarten to 12th grade, and 30% of university students now are women. And there are more than 170 public and private higher education institutions across the country, even in the most difficult parts of Afghanistan. And I'm told that women are the majority of teachers at these schools, which is important. And according to some government reports, women make up to 27% of government employees before they were not even allowed to work. And they serve as ministers, deputy ministers, judges, and in many other positions. According to the United Nations maternal mortality rates, they used to be second in the world, and they have fallen substantially. And that is because there are so many women that are trained as midwives and health professionals now and are working to help other women. And I understand there are over 530 public and private hospitals and hundreds of health and sub-health centers. And even if these numbers are exaggerated, women appear to be an important part of the success that is happening, certainly in education and healthcare. And so wouldn't that alone make up our investments? Wouldn't that alone justify our investments in the country? I know the United Nations has made several reports that when women are educated and empowered and respected, the amount of terrorism in that country or in that village goes down. So investing in women and allowing them to be part of the country and not killing them if they go to school, I think we've made a tremendous impact in that country. And I'm afraid if we retreat and leave, it'll go back to the way it was before. So my question is, do you believe women have made a significant contribution to successes in education and healthcare? And also, if we left, as some politicians are proposing, wouldn't it fall back to the other way, where they were where being a woman meant you were almost not alive in what you were allowed to do? Can you respond?
I'm happy to, Madam Chairman, and I think you hit a good point and one of the successes that we have had in Afghanistan. And but you've also raised a concern, and I must admit, for all the trips I've gone there and all of the Afghan women I have talked to, I have not met one Afghan woman who trusts the Taliban. And the concern is, if they're excluded from the negotiations, or if the negotiations are done by men and they ignore the advances, it is going to be very bad for women in Afghanistan. And so that is a serious concern I think we all have.
I'd like unanimous consent to place in the record a letter that I've written to Secretary Pompeo expressing the same concern as the IG, that women need to have a seat at the table in the peace talks so that their rights aren't traded away and lost. You mentioned the amount of corruption. Do you think it would be a way of addressing corruption if you had a certain percentage of the contracts, which are numerous coming from USAID and American-led efforts to help the country, that they go to women-led organizations so that maybe the gas would get into the automobiles for the military, maybe the money would get to the place that it was intended? Do you think if we required that certain amount of the money go to women-led organizations? And certainly any ideas that you have, I know that the women's movement here in America and around the world was pleading with the United States to have a seat at the table for women in the peace negotiations. Any of your ideas that you might have on how we can include women in the peace negotiations?
I would have to get back to you on that. I know we have had set-aside programs in the past, and Congress has actually designated a significant amount of money to the Afghan police and the Afghan military to recruit women in that area, and I think there has been money set aside for women's programs by USAID, but I don't know how successful that has been. We reported on that in relationship to the military, and then the Defense Department classified that information. So the amount of women that were being recruited, and that was, they reversed themselves, but still there's a serious problem that even though you have set aside money for certain things in Afghanistan, it's not spent. We're going to have a report coming out soon, ma'am, on the number of buildings we built for women in the Afghan military and police that are now vacant. You have to have a will on the Afghan men's side, and that's the problem we're facing.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask another question and a request?
Of course, I do want to, without objection, order that your letter be entered into the record, and now you are recognized.
But my question really was not more women in the military and more women in the police. My question was more women organizations being put in charge of the finances so it gets to the people and not to corruption. Years earlier, I passed a bill that was part of the Appropriations Committee that $60 million going to Afghanistan had to be spent with or given to a woman-led organization. I can get a copy of that legislation to you, and I'd like to request, with the chairman's permission, a meeting with you and the Women's Caucus if you could go over what happened to that $60 million. What was it, if the problem is corruption, and then I would say I represent a district that is a business district, and New York City, it's a business capital of many different businesses, and the stories that I hear from businessmen are just horrible. You know that all of their contracts are let through corruption and payoffs and this kind of thing. And if American business felt like they could be treated fairly, they would invest in Afghanistan. And maybe we need to look at any of the assignments and contracts, because I hear they're incredibly corrupt. Business people now go around the country giving speeches, don't go to Afghanistan, they're not going to treat you fairly. Which is a horrible situation to be in. If American business felt that it was secure and honest, you'd have a lot of people coming in to help and to work and help the country. In any event, I want to thank you for your service and your leadership. It's an incredibly important assignment, and I look forward to meeting with you again on what happened to that $60 million, whether it was spent honestly and if it helped the people. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I'd be very happy to follow up, and I think apropos of that, we are actually embarked upon a new lessons learned program specifically dealing with the gender issue. So I know my staff who are working on that would love to meet with yourself and other interested parties up here as to how we should shape that lessons learned report. So I look forward to that conversation.
Just giving it back to you, I would put women in charge of certain things. Being a police officer, you're not in charge unless you're Val Demings, who is a member of Congress now. But running distribution of food or distribution of gasoline or distribution of assets for the country, I think that the numbers speak for themselves, that the women have made an incredible contribution to education and healthcare and improved the country. They could possibly improve the management and honesty of getting the money to the people and to a democracy and to a stronger country. You know, as we say in Congress, when you empower women, you empower the country. And maybe we should use that same motto in Afghanistan and see if given contracts to manage and do it honestly. That's the problem. You're saying the money's going to situations and it's all corrupt. But the men are all in charge. If you try a few sample cases, I know that We created the Human Rights Commission there. I've had some meetings with the people that run that, men and women. Maybe they could be empowered to help honestly move goods and services to the extent, for the purposes that they were allocated. I want to thank you for your service, and I just represent New York, and I know that the attack on New York was planned and put in place in Afghanistan. And I hope and pray that we do not go back to a situation where elements of evil are there that can plot and kill people around the world as they did. They killed 3,000 of my neighbors and constituents in New York City in their attack on 9/11. And one of the reasons we're there is to try to prevent that. So I hope you're making that your priority too. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields.